Hello Booktube, I'm Scott.
Oh, I'm Nelle.
We are Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot. Today we are going to review the work. Oh, come on, mate. Yeah, you're gonna stop doing that.
The poochie.
Today we're going.
He's so big.
He's so big. He's covering my entire.
Yeah.
It's alright. And this will keep him happy for a bit. He remembers me doing this to him when he was a tiny thing.
I know, I've got photos. Sorry.
Today we're going to review Life as a Unicorn by Amrou Al-Kadhi.
Yes. Scott put this in his top 10 last year and I finished it last week. So we're going to talk about it because while I enjoyed it, I didn't think it's top 10 material. So we've got a difference of opinion.
We do.
We might hash out of it.
So you thought it was good, but you didn't think it was amazing.
Yeah. And I guess some of the things that I really liked about it, the topic matter is just very interesting. It's the story of a young Muslim who grows up in the Middle East and then moves to London. And their difficulty with sort of the point where several aspects of their identity meet, and that's his Muslim heritage, his identity as a migrant, his queer identity as both gay and eventually as non-binary, and also his their drag queen, their decision to be a drag queen, I guess.
Yeah.
Because it's an occupation. But lots of things they did really well in this. One of the first things that I think I'm going to mention, because I just made an error with pronouns there, but one of the things that I found really interesting is that they referred to themselves as he throughout most of the book, until until we got to the point in the narrative where they...
It was basically when the drag started, wasn't it?
Yeah, like right towards the end, where we got to the point in the narrative where they found a language to talk about their gender as being fluid and non-binary. That was when the pronouns switched in the book. And I thought that was really interesting and really clear, and it made... It made me comfortable to engage with the idea that this was a transition for Amrou and that this was a change in how they presented to people.
And I think it shows the power of getting pronouns correct, and which is something that we are both terrible at.
But we're trying, and we'll practice.
But it just shows the importance of getting them correct, using because it changes the narrative, doesn't it?
Also the importance of, when you do get them wrong, not making a big song and dance, just correcting yourself and moving on, because that moment is an ick moment for everyone, but making it about you and making a big song and dance over your failure doesn't help them. But
okay, so you didn't really like the way Amrou presented themselves.
I think my main problem is actually with the structure of the memoir, and I think this is one of the things that you have difficulty with when you critique a memoir versus fiction, in the sense that you can't really critique the content without critiquing someone's life story, which is a bit weird. And you're often dealing with someone who, unless they can afford a ghostwriter, is not a professional writer. So when they tackle a structure like Amrou has done, that I think requires a bit of finesse, sometimes they don't get it right, and sometimes that, rather than failing and making it unreadable, leaves you with a the wrong impression. And I think that's what's happened here.
Can I present a theory to you? A lot of the times in this book, Amrou is quite mean, and Amrou presents their interpretation of why they were mean, and it sort of leaves a bit to be desired. But the people that Amrou are talking about are real people who would read this book, and that maybe Amrou didn't want to portray them in a negative light at all.
I think that the reasons that Amrou has structured it the way they have are all very fine. I just think the execution hasn't quite been there. I think that's really what it comes down to. It's not expressed. Each narrative segment is discussed by sort of Amrou in the now, with the insight that Amrou has gained through years of therapy and, you know, all the other things that you go through to deal with your shit. And the narrator sort of shares bits and pieces of those insights, but not all of them as the story goes forward. And it leaves you wondering whether the gaps in insight, gaps in, you know, Amrou of the present's insight, and some of those gaps are filled in later on. One in particular, just sort of an empathy for Amrou's mother, and where she sits within the patriarchy really comes very late in the novel, and I think that's to demonstrate when Amrou themselves went through that empathy of understanding. But when you're getting so much insight from the narrator early on, and that key thing is missing, it sort of makes you feel like the character's a bit of a twat. And I didn't want to think he was a twat, because he was going through, or they were going through so much, but at the same time they had very little. Lots of insight for why they were behaving like an ass, but very little insight for anyone else's difficulty. And Amrou has a very intersectional personality, but they are also in a very wealthy environment, and they are not entirely without privilege.
Amrou went to Eton and Cambridge. Amrou's dad had a butt ton of money, and Amrou was the kid that people were friends with because they
wanted his money.
Yeah, he bought them drugs.
So I don't actually think it's personality flaws, but I think at points in the memoir it feels like that, because the structure isn't quite.
I think you've got the insight of Amrou as a 14-year-old, and then you also have the insight of Amrou as a 30-year-old, or however old Amrou is as the author of this, and that when you're seeing Amrou's insight into the way their mother is treating them as a 14-year-old, Amrou's mother is like a demon and he has no compassion for her and she is a horrible person. But Amrou as a 30-year-old can sort of empathise with Amrou.
And I almost think the memoir would have been better if there'd been no insight in the earlier years, if it just had have been a description of how they felt in that moment and left the insight to later on.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think we would have established better empathy with child Amrou, who would have felt abandoned and rejected and all of the things that you would feel in that sort of situation where your parents basically tell you you can't be who you are. But I think the desire to provide insight as we go along has disrupted that connection with the younger character, and then made it less clear as we go further down the thing. That's my criticism. It's actually a structural thing.
I understand what you're saying, but that is not the experience I had when I was reading it.
Which is really interesting to me.
So I completely disagree with you and think that you are able to empathise with all characters and...
Yeah, I mean, you can, but it's just not easy, and it's not. It's not that flowing experience.
I understand what you, but I did find it flowing and easy, and this is actually a bit opposite for us, because that would normally be
the other way around.
Yeah. The other things I liked in this novel, Amrou discussed the hypocrisy within the Muslim community, in particularly the friend of his father's, or their fathers,
who was happy to hang out with drag queens, but was not happy for Amrou to be one.
And Amrou was so confused by like, so betrayed by that.
Yeah.
All of that. And I really enjoyed the towards the end, I really enjoyed the mother's realization and Amrou's realization about the mother, which we've already discussed.
Yeah, I think showing that the rejection of queer identities by parents is not always permanent is a really important narrative to promote.
And
because I think that there are a lot of parents out there who wish they could take back bad reactions.
And the logic behind Amrou's mum and the way she acted, it is something that I was able to empathise with and understand, and I didn't agree with her choices, but I understood them, and I understood that they came from a position of love towards her child rather than a position of religious ideology. Yeah,
enforcing dogma. Definitely. I think that was probably the best part of the memoir, is that reconciliation sort of moment. That, and I think there's a scene that you start with and that Amrou comes back to, that's quite evocative of Amrou performing and there being women in
the very first scene where the Muslim women see him perform,
and they are freaking out. And
surely Amrou is a she when
she's in drag, but totally freaking out, and then the Muslim women come up after the show and gush, which is lovely.
That is lovely. The other thing that we haven't mentioned about this novel is memoir, is that it is quite funny in places.
There were bits that I thought were funny, but everyone has said how funny it is, and I didn't find that to be a major. Which maybe I was just in a foul mood.
Maybe. I don't think it was, like, I wouldn't recommend it as a comedy memoir.
No.
But Amrou definitely remembers the funny parts of their life and
for sure.
has included them, and there is definitely some light-hearted moments, which I think really works well when you're talking about a kid that is basically suicidal because they think that they're going to hell because of their identity, and they're trying to figure out whether they're going to be miserable for the rest of their life or whether they're going to go to hell. You know, like, it's really nice to have something like...
Yeah, for sure.
Like some of the jokes, which I really want to spoil, but I won't.
No.
But yeah, definitely read it for a couple of the jokes.
It's definitely worth a read. If for nothing else, then I learnt quite a lot about Muslim culture, and not just about your sort of more traditional Muslim culture, but later in life, Amrou connects to sort of queer accepting corners of Muslim culture and learning about the different varieties of Islamic faith and all the huge amount of variety, I guess, that that there is in Islam. That was really interesting.
Yeah, I personally, I just did. It was quite an intersectional moment for me because I was reading a novel about a drag queen, and suddenly I had a lot more empathy for women in it because I was able to empathise with Amrou's mother and understand her, and like being able to empathise with new people, like people that aren't people you've been able to empathise with in other reading experiences is always
good.
And Amrou's mother is such a interesting character, and even though she was horrible to him, I really liked her. And then when I was able to like her at the end, it was good. Yeah. Well,
I think that's our thoughts.
That's it. Look, if you've gotten to the end, please subscribe to our channel, give us a like. If you've read this novel, let us know what you thought of it, if you agree or disagree with anything we've said.
And all the things.
And if you haven't read this novel, let us know if you're going to go out and buy it, because you should.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.